So you've been such a fantastic audience throughout the day, and now we have our last panel in this track. Not at the conference, that's gonna be continuing next door. I know we've had all of our market-making investors. We need our internet-breaking influencer. That'll be next door after this. But first, we have an incredible panel to address a key topic within our industry, that of female representation. So please welcome today's moderator for Carpe Diem, Why the Time to Champion Female Fund Managers is Now, Lydia Tomkew, Senior Reporter, Financial Times of Fundfire, and her guests. So we have Michelle Leung, Founder and CEO of Xingtai Capital, Katie O'Reilly, Managing Director of Prosac, Amanda Pullinger, CEO of 100 Women in Finance, and Jasmine Richards, Heads of Diverse Manager Research at Cambridge Associates. Lydia, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted, before we dive into the panel, to just share some statistics with all of you and level set here. Globally, across hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, private debt, real estate, infrastructure, and natural resources managers, women make up 20% of the alts workforce. That's according to data from Preqin from last year. And when you go to senior positions, the alts industry, only 12% are held by women. So the problem is well known, and I'm gonna let the panelists today focus on the solutions and introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their paths and journeys. So we'll start with you, Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Leung. I'm the founder and CEO of Xingtai Capital. We manage a long-only China equity fund. So I'm part of this journey. I'm a female leader of an asset management firm, and I would say that we still need more dialogue, more attention, and more resources, more solutions to actually make this happen for women managers. If you look at the statistics, it's still the case that women PMs, women leaders are in the minority. So we're still sub 20%, sub 10%. Interestingly, in the market I'm from, in China, the representation is slightly higher. So we have roughly 25% on the last statistics that was taken amongst portfolio managers that are female. And there's a lot of debate about this in terms of why this is. And I think part of it is cultural, because in China, a lot of the home finances are handled by the matriarch, by the mother, and there's more support socially for care for children. So that's part of the reason. But I think that another interesting point is that although there is a higher female representation amongst managers, the allocations from allocators is still trailing. So if I think of my peers, they're all men. If I see who's actually getting funded, it's mainly the male managers, to put it crudely. So I think we need more solutions and more dialogue and more attention to this issue.
Katie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Katie O'Reilly. I'm Managing Director at Prosac Partners, which is a PR, communications, and marketing firm based in New York City. I'm actually building a new practice for Prosac around network development and conference concierge, which the network piece of it I think is very much part of this conversation, which we're going to talk about later, how women prioritize and develop business and professional networks for themselves. I'm also a senior advisor with the Milken Institute, where I spent 15 years, the last 7 of which running their global business and program development group, which was essentially responsible for all the revenue of the organization, 70% of which came from conferences. And I mean, aside from being a woman in the industry, I sort of became much more aware of this issue of women being, or the importance, I suppose, of having women outside and speaking up for their businesses, for their careers, speaking about financial markets, because a lot of the work I was doing at Milken when I first started was back in 2007. We were working mostly with male speakers. I don't know how many of you attend that conference. I mean, it's not so dissimilar from a lot of financial conferences. It was mostly male, white male speakers. And I, kind of took it upon myself, along with some others at the organization, to reach out to more senior women and recruit them for sessions and panels. And the amount of times that I was talked out of it by the women that I was trying to recruit to be speakers, I just sort of found, at first curious, and then just more and more disappointing and frustrating. And this is not to say that, it's not that women are the problem, but I think there's a socialization of women that is problematic. And so getting women to see themselves as actually competent and capable of speaking on a panel, of being a CEO and taking that leadership role. I think a lot of women are very focused on doing their jobs, their day jobs, and then many of them have caring jobs and caretaking jobs that they have to prioritize as well that are different from their male counterparts. And so that takes up a lot of time. I sometimes talk about, if you're a mother, and this is not true for every woman, but if you're a mother, even if you're outsourcing all of that childcare, that's a department that you're taking care of, right? In addition to your day job and all of those professional responsibilities. So the self-care and I think sort of nurturing of your own professional ambition tends to fall by the wayside. So that's my interest. I think we're trying to help women do that and accomplish more, and that's why I'm here. And I'm happy to see so many men in the audience, actually.
So I'm Amanda Pullinger. I'm the CEO of 100 Women in Finance, which started life as 100 Women in Hedge Funds in 2001. So 21 plus years later, we are now in 32 locations across 5 continents. We launched 3 new locations in Africa last year. We are focused on empowering women in the industry at every career stage and inspiring the next generation of pre-career women to find pathways into the industry. We need men to make all of that happen, and so I'm also happy to see men in the audience, and we have male members of the organization who are really critical to creating the change that we need to see. And as we celebrated our 20th anniversary a couple of years ago, we looked back at all that we'd achieved. And we've connected women in the industry. We've put on some fantastic education events around the world that are put on by our volunteer members. We've raised a lot of money for charity over the years. And yet, in certain areas, the demographics have not shifted at all. And so we chose to focus our Vision 30 by 40 on 2 particular areas in the industry. One was senior investment professionals, and the other were executive committee roles in the industry. And so our vision says that by 2040, we want to see 30% of senior investment professionals be women, and 30% of executive committee roles be filled by women. And certainly on the former, we have a ways to go. We're doing a lot of work in terms of measurement. But I think one of the things that is really important to me is figuring out not why, but how do we create the solutions? What are the initiatives that are actually going to work in terms of encouraging more women to come into the investing side of the business and to stick at it?
Hi, I'm Jasmine Richards. As you mentioned, I head up the Diverse Manager Research team here at Cambridge. For those that don't know, Cambridge is a global investment manager. We work with clients from high net worth individuals on up to corporate and public pensions, but the core of our business is definitely within the endowment and foundation space. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, and our original clients were endowments, and so certainly subscribe to the endowment model and why you should invest in emerging managers and have been early in areas like private equity and ESG. And so I see my team as an extension really of investing where others haven't, but should, right? So we all know the statistics that women and people of color, as you would suspect, perform the same as their peers. But as Michelle mentioned, not only are they underrepresented in terms of the assets that are invested with them, so less than 2% of assets globally are with what you could estimate as 70% of the population. But even if you look at the distribution in terms of the representation, they actually represent at least 10% of the opportunity set, which we all know isn't where it should be. But we're not even investing on par with those managers that exist. And so in 2020, Cambridge, we made a commitment to bringing our assets up to at least that 10%, right? So we want to at least be on par with the universe. And as you mentioned, our work centers around a lot of the issues in the industry that you have identified, right? So how do we equitably underwrite, invest in women and people of color, right? Like, how do we make sure that there's a full pipeline of talent to support us investing and growing even that 10% number? And so really excited to be here. This is the core of the work that we do, but we just see it as part of good investing.
Jasmine, I want to stick with you and ask from your perspective where institutional allocators are right now as far as allocating or building programs to allocate to women, and what you see as the biggest barriers. What's holding them back?
So obviously, I get to work with a lot of the willing institutions, right? Like, and a lot of the willing asset owners that are incredibly invested in this space. But the approach that we've taken is decidedly, again, if you understand the investment thesis, this isn't just for the asset owners that get it at this point. And so we've definitely seen a great higher number of institutions that have incorporated specific language around diversity within their investment policy statement, right? Like, we've seen a 15% increase from, we do a biannual survey in terms of institutions that have codified that in their governance documents. You also obviously see more supply coming on. It was like a revolutionary year last year that we had 2 women-owned hedge funds, right? Like above $1 billion, which isn't what it should be. But I think that people are starting to become aware of the opportunity in this space. But with that said, I think there's still some hesitancy around how do you do that? And what we see is that you have to go to the core of your investment process. How are you sourcing ideas? How are you evaluating those ideas? I don't think people wake up intending to do harm in the world, right? Like, or make biased decisions. But in the rubrics and the measurements and the ways that we characterize what a good investment look like, there are biases baked in those. And so the work still to be done is to unpack that.
Amanda, I want to come back to you and ask about the portfolio manager role and what you're doing on that pipeline and focusing there.
So, I mean, it's really fascinating what you've just said, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? And I think a lot of the challenges come from the fact that, as you said, with a portfolio, you know, with how you look at an investment proposal, right, that's coming in. As human beings, we all prefer to hang out with people who look like us and think like us and have the same experience. Why? Because it just makes it easy to communicate. And that's the fundamental challenge with everything that we are seeing, right? And so it's really figuring out, how do we help people get outside of their box, number one. The second issue is that for a lot of women, I think around the world, culturally, we've been told over the years that if you perform and if you work hard, someone will notice you. Mm-hmm. We talk about performance a lot in this industry, but actually, it's complete rubbish that that's the basis on which people get invested in, right? Visibility is absolutely key in determining what does an expert look like. So one of the things that we've been doing is creating a platform for our female portfolio managers in the industry across private equity, real estate, VC, hedge funds, infrastructure, ESG, long-only mutual fund, to change the perception of what an expert looks like. So the first step is really to acknowledge there are portfolio managers out there, rather than talking about the lack of. And so we have on our website over 500 female fund managers, portfolio managers, deal makers, with their pictures. And that's critical because it's changing the perception of what an expert looks like. It's also countering the argument that many institutional investors have made, where they say, we can't find the women. If I hear that statement one more time, and so, but rather than saying, oh, that's not true, there are women, we wanted to create an environment where we could show that these women existed, right? And so that was the main purpose of our Fund Women Visibility Initiative. And then we took it one step further, and we said, okay, we need to create an environment where institutional investors can meet these female managers. And so we created our Global Fund Women Conference. And so last year, actually through iConnections, we had over 400 institutional investors meeting with 400 female managers. Now, that's only the first step, because then you've got to get the allocations made. But the first step is surely to get people to know that those women exist. And in terms of visibility, you mentioned that the hesitance of women to speak. And it drives me crazy that these are women who are articulate, experts in their area, but for whatever reason, find it hard to get on this stage. And so again, as we think about how do we get more women on the stage, a lot of it is those human elements, right? You know, I hate to say it, but for women, what you look like matters more than many men. And so you're thinking not just what am I going to talk about and, you know, do I have a squeaky voice or how am I going to be perceived? But it's also what do I look like? Do I, you know, am I, and all of these things add up to hurdles that women put on themselves. And so again, a lot of what we're trying to do is to really encourage women to be visible, to take that step, to be seen as an expert. Because at the end of the day, this is a relationship business. So if institutional investors see you up on the stage, I hate to tell you, that's what matters far more than your performance.
I think you can I jump in
Yeah,
here? 'Cause
please do.
I was going to say, I think you can think about it too as there are a lot, it's not that performance doesn't matter or that intelligence doesn't matter, these things, but all things being equal, there are lots of people who are qualified to take a certain investment or to take a certain job, right? So if you're in the position of power, making the hire, making the investment, you want some efficiency to your work, so you're going to go to what's familiar. And Amanda talking made me think of this book called The Confidence Code. I don't know if anyone's written it, or read it. It's quite a dated book right now. Probably it's 25, maybe 30 years old. But it talks a lot about how girls are socialized as kids, that when they start off in elementary school, they stand out because they're quiet, they sit with their hands folded, they listen, they pay attention, they raise their hand, you know, and they're not out roughhousing and getting their elbows out and whatever. And I recognize that's a broad generalization, but when I look back at my own career and the things as a young woman, because I'm not so young anymore, I think that I thought I was going to get ahead. It was, you know, raising my hand to do the extra project and work late at night. And not that those things don't matter, but I actually would say to women, prioritize your business relationships and networks and being at conferences and speaking. And those are the things that have the power to change the trajectory of your career and the trajectory of your business, is meeting the right person, developing the right relationship. And it's not just women that need help with this, but women, I think, in general, need more help.
Michelle, what has the capital raising process been like for you? And can you tell us a little bit about some of the maybe barriers or things you face that you think perhaps your male counterparts, colleagues haven't?
I think capital raising is tough for any manager. It's much harder than you think. But I would say that my journey has been challenging, but also rewarding. You know, we have a meaningful, sizable business. It's small compared to my male counterparts, but you know, I've had some success, so that's reassuring. But I would point out that, you know, our fund is a top performer, and par on par, if you compare us with many other much larger funds, we're performing much better. So if it was just on a performance track, then we should be larger than some of my peers, and we're not. So that's one interesting point. And I would say that, I did encounter some of the, typical biases, walking into a room with my male counterpart, and then the conversation goes to the male counterpart because they think I'm not the decision maker or not the important person in the room. Some subtle biases like that. But I would say that the different things have helped my career, building relationships that have helped. The women's conference was very helpful. I think my mic just went off. So there have been different solutions along the way, but it's an uphill battle, I think, and I think we need more attention to this issue. I would say that in our market, I would think of some of my peers. So, in the public equity space, we are quite a top performer. On the private equity side, which is where I came from, the top China manager is also a woman-led firm. And in the fund of funds business on the private equity side, it's also a women-led organization, actually a classmate of mine from business school. So we have many examples in our market of women-led firms that are very successful in terms of the performance and the results they've achieved. But we still have this gap in terms of where the allocations are going. So I would say, there's a bit of a call to allocators. Look at performance if that's what the key decision-making is. But if you're looking at performance, you should be allocating to more of the women managers. And also look at the fact that I think women in general are good fiduciaries. We try harder. We want to, do our best. I'm not saying male managers are not doing the same, but I'm just saying that we do try harder, I think. And so I think, I would say that it's important at a conference like this for allocators to be more aware of these issues, It starts with where the funding goes. I think if we see more examples of larger, successful women-led firms, that will change the perception and that will change the industry.
You also mentioned to me that you've hired, and your firm is about 90% women?
Yes, so our firm is, my partner is a male, so the two of us are the main principals, so it's myself and my partner who's a CIO, but the rest of the firm is pretty much women. So the COO is a woman, all the research team are women, and that was both conscious decision, but also we hired based on meritocracy. It was a meritocratic process, but we ended up with a dominant female firm.
I'm wondering if you have any advice on how you did that, because I've sometimes heard the argument, oh, we just couldn't find the right candidate, or we did interview the one woman, we checked the box. What you say to that, having hired as you have?
It was based on it was a meritocratic process, so we hired the best candidate. Maybe there was a slight cultural bias being from a woman-led firm that we paid more attention to the female candidates coming into interviews. But I would say that there's so much talent amongst the female investment professional pool that it's not difficult in our industry to hire, leading, strong female candidates.
I think it really matters, who's at the top of a firm, right? And it matters again for a human reason, that for most women, if you can't see that it's possible for someone like you to be in a particular role, to be in a particular firm, you don't go in that direction. And this is why we're trying to build these pathways, right? And to be able to demonstrate that there are women who've gone before you. And so it's interesting when firms come to me and say, hey, have you got any female portfolio managers for me? And I'll say, well, yes. We've got all of these women. But why would they come and be the first one at your firm, right? And so for those firms that are really being deliberate about their senior management team having diversity, that makes a big difference in terms of attracting talent. We did some work with Deloitte on this a couple of years ago, and there is a multiplier effect. If there are women in the C-suite of a firm in our industry, particularly on the investment side, you're more likely to see larger numbers in the senior investment side. So again, it's thinking about diversity, not because it's a politically correct thing to do, but if you want to attract the best talent, you have to be deliberate about it. and you have to demonstrate that you are a workplace that actually cares, not just talks about, but cares about inclusion.
Jasmine, you mentioned some of the large, over $1 billion women-led launches we saw last year. I wanted to ask you about sort of other progress you've seen, especially in what is going to be maybe a tough market environment and allocation environment for a lot of investors.
Yeah, no, I think, we're kind of cautiously optimistic because I do think that ultimately you have to have the demand, right? Like we can have all the supply in the world, right? Like, but unless, and that's why our goal was focused on investing, right? Like that has to be the North Star. Unless you're doing that, right? Like we're just spinning our wheels here. And so what I've been encouraged by is that not only are we seeing more people spin out, start their own firms, I think we also have, since 2019, started looking at, across all of the funds that we're invested with, diversity at 4 different layers, right? Because we want to be able to predict the change. And so not only are you seeing this matter in terms of larger number of starts, right? Like if we did a survey just of the privates universe, and you've seen the number of funds come to market triple over the last 10 years if you look at 3-year fundraising cycles, right? So the supply is increasing, and that's great. But what I'm also encouraged by are the number of institutions now that have codified this in their governance, because that is sustainable. What I wouldn't want to happen in this environment is that, right, like when we have, the last 3 years, right, like when everything is going straight up into the right, fine, we'll care about this topic. But if we enter a tumultuous environment, we're just gonna go with the steady Eddie, what we know, and everyone retrenches. And so seeing that you have institutions that have codified this in their governance documents, they're thinking about who's on there, not only on their boards, but on their investment committees. They're thinking about not only, yes, it's great to have firms in our portfolios that are owned by women and people of color, but what are the questions we're asking to the other 80% of managers in our portfolio? And so I've been encouraged really by the expansiveness of how, just as an industry, we thought about this topic.
And as a final question for each of you, the title of this panel is Why the Time to Champion Female Managers is Now. I want to ask you that. What's the argument? What's the last thought you want to leave the audience with? Start with you, Michelle.
I think the time should have been before, but if it wasn't, let's make it now.
What else do we have? Yeah.
Let's make it now. So our market is going the opposite direction of the US, so we're entering recovery and a bull market now. So we're hoping that that will change the attention to China managers in general, and hopefully that also extends to female China managers. But I think the time should have been and really is right now.
Why now? I mean, I think partly because there has been progress and signs of positivity. I mean, there are increasing numbers of women running companies. I think something like investors are putting 15% more capital into women-run firms than they were 5 years ago. So it's inching forward. I think generally, though, the answer is because, I mean, we're in the PR and marketing business at ProSec, and generally, it's just not an acceptable answer to not have this as a priority in some way in your business, both from a performance perspective and a talent retention and recruitment perspective. So you're going to lose your edge if you're not focused on it.
Why now? Because we face some very, very complex global issues. And I sat on the stage in Saudi Arabia at the FII conference last year, and I said, if we are facing a complex issue, why do you want to exclude half the population from being around the table to discuss the perspectives? Not only are you going to miss out on opportunities to invest, you're also going to you're going to hit blind spots that people with different perspectives who've had different experiences in life are going to pick up on. So we live in a complex world. Why not have the full team of people? It is going to produce, it's more complicated, right? It's more complicated to work with people who are different from you. But ultimately, I believe you end up with better investing decisions.
Yeah, I just think it's just fundamental good investing, right? Like we get paid for producing returns, that are properly risk managed, which is only going to become more important in this environment. And we understand fundamentally as an industry that the way you manage risk is through diversification. And I think that extends not only to the investments that you're making, but who's doing the investing.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank
all of
you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.